His name was Chris Lemons, and he laid unconscious on the North Sea bed almost 100 meters below the surface. He accepted his fate to spend his last minutes in the dark and cold waters of the North Sea. And in today's video, I'm going to tell you about his story. Chris worked in the North Sea, diving from his ship in a diving bell, repairing oil rig structures. Like always, it was a usual day in September 2012. At least normalcy for a scuba diver, that is. But even for Chris, he never would have expected the day to end the way it did. That day, Chris along with his two colleagues, Dave Usa and Duncan Alcock, were lowered 91 meters in their diving bell to fix a pipe on the seabed at the Huntington oil field east of Peterhead in Aberdeenshire. At the time, the ship was enduring 35 knot winds, but according to experts, it was standard weather for that time of the year. So Chris and his two friends did not waste a single second and got to work as they were in deep and dark sea. Some time went by. All three divers suddenly heard an alarm. By this point, the trio had been communicating with the diver supervisor, Craig, up in the ship through an earpiece in their helmets. At first, they thought it was just a test as they would hear alarms often in their dive control. But this time, the sound was instantaneously followed by Craig asking Chris and the other two divers to get out of the structure, get on top of it and back to the diving bell as quickly as they could. Chris could tell from the urgency in Craig's voice that this was not a drill and this was something deadly serious. While Chris and the other two were in the water, what they didn't know was that the ship was actually moving away as the computer that kept the ship in position had failed. This meant bad news. You see, when divers are lowered to an extreme depth in a diving bell, they are still kept attached to the ship by a cord. So, to Chris and his two friends, the ship drifting away meant them also being dragged away with it because they were attached to the ship with the cord. However, with this whole ordeal, Chris specifically had an even worse problem. His cord got snagged on part of the metal structure. It made everything 100 times more deadly for him. That cord was not only the tether back to the diving bell and the ship, but it also provided Chris, or any diver for that matter, with breathing gas, hot water to keep the suits warm in the 3-degree C, as well as light and electricity. It was also his only way to communicate with the ship, so right away he knew he was in grave danger. He basically had 8,000 tons of a ship pulling against him. He was essentially an anchor to that in the bottom. He had no escape. Dave and Duncan could not do anything. The cord was pulled so tight it was bending a stainless steel rack off the wall in the diving bell. Not long passed. First, the communication cable snapped. Then the gas hose stretched to a point Chris had nothing to breathe. All this was happening within a matter of 30 seconds. You see, when divers go to these depths to work at oil rigs, they almost never carry anything because the cord provides them with everything. It was the same with Chris, except he was carrying a bailout bottle. It is a set of air cylinders on his back to use in an emergency situation. But due to the depth that Chris is at, all the air would run out almost immediately. Chris realized at max he would have about 5 to 6 minutes of gas in the tanks, and that was nowhere enough for him to survive. The gas hose is too stretched and therefore he can't breathe, and that was his problem. So now that there's no air, Chris had no option but to use the bailout gas, so he opened the supply on his back. Shortly thereafter, the cord fully snapped like a shotgun going off. Chris fell down to the floor of the sea. A crew member back on the ship pulled up the cord and shouted, "I've lost my diver, I've lost my diver." All while Chris was falling almost 100 meters down to the seabed in scary darkness. He couldn't see a thing down there because remember, he lost not only his air supply but also electricity and light. By this point it was about 2 in the morning. The nightmare was only getting worse, though Chris somehow managed to find the structure they had been doing the repair on and found a way to climb up on it. But still, the diving bell wasn't there, and so are Dave and Duncan. They also have disappeared. By this point, Chris already has used up about 2 to 3 minutes of his gas. He told himself, "So this is where I would end my days." Chris felt intense fear and panic. He was on a countdown and it was counting really fast. Once he accepted that there was no hope of survival, he told himself, "I am powerless to do anything to save myself." Chris was feeling a great deal of sadness and at the same time a strong disbelief that he was going to die. How did I find myself in this dark, sad and horrible place? He thought of everybody at home and the chaos he would cause. But all while what he didn't know was that Dave and Duncan didn't really disappear. In fact, they along with the whole crew of the ship had been searching for him the whole time. Though they already had presumed Chris might be dead, but still they at least wanted to find the corpse. So they were putting superhuman effort to locate him. So miraculously, Dave and Duncan found him unconscious on the structure. By the time of his discovery, his bailout gas had fully run out. He should have died, but he didn't. When Duncan gave him a few breaths of air, he spluttered to life. It had been 35 minutes since Chris had turned on his emergency air supply by this point. So that means if his bailout air ran out within 5 to 6 minutes, for almost half an hour he didn't have any air to breathe. But then how did he survive? With nothing to breathe for that long, Chris could easily have suffered brain damage, but he was completely fine. Chris believes the freezing water might have had something to do with slowing down his body functions, or the gas they breathe underwater might be the reason as it has a higher concentration of oxygen. He thinks it may have saturated his tissues and cells to allow him to survive. Well, all in all, how he survived is a bit unclear, and maybe even a mystery. Nonetheless, what's important is that he survived and was safely rescued back to the ship. Though about 3 weeks later, he returned to diving in the sea again with his team as if nothing happened. You might think he is crazy for this. Well, that was his job. He did it for a living and not for fun. No matter the riskiness, sometimes people wouldn't quit a job that easy. Plus, it was not his fault. It was an unforeseen situation. Nobody could have predicted a computer failure literally at the time when divers were in the water. But luckily, after that day, Chris never experienced anything life-threatening. In fact, a few months after this incident, he married his fiancée, Morag Martin. To this day, Morag says she is grateful to Dave and Duncan. She said, "My stomach still churns to hear the story. I came ridiculously close to losing him and being robbed of the life that we were going to have. I'm extremely grateful to both of them." So thanks to his two buddies, Chris survived an ordeal that could have easily killed him. Alright, that brings us to the end of the story. Thank you for watching, and if you like horror and dark storytelling videos, consider subscribing. I would really appreciate it. Alright then, with another story, I'll see you guys soon. Until then, stay safe out there and goodbye.